Welcome back to the Philips African Dialogues, focusing of course on lighting Africa. Still with me in studio, JJ van Dongen, CEO and Senior Vice President for Philips Africa, Andrew Etzinger, Senior General Manager for Integrated Demand Management at Eskom, and joining us now for the second half of the show, Professor Wilhelm Leuschner, Director of Light and Vision Laboratory in the Department of Electrical, Electronic and Computer Engineering at the University of Pretoria, and of course joining us still from our bureau in Nairobi, Itotia Njagi, Managing Lighting Africa Program for the IFC. Thank you so much for joining the conversation, Professor. So bring in your expertise when it comes to technological advancements, when it comes to the solar industry.
Yes, I think I'm very excited about what is happening in lighting and energy efficiency. And for us as researchers, it's a combination of solid-state technology. If you use photovoltaic panels and LED lighting, light-emitting diodes, those are both semiconductor devices. They're both low-voltage devices, and the energy efficiency from the photovoltaic panel can be very well used in LED applications. The nice thing about the LED is that you can tailor the light to the best condition possible with minimum energy, and that actually makes it the perfect future source to go with photovoltaics. And
that's of course a big focus area for you. So tell us about the energy savings when it comes to these LED products and why specifically they're so appropriate and relevant for Africa.
Yeah. Typically you save about 80% of the energy consumption. But a perfect example in terms of how LED and solar's changed. 2 years ago we installed one of our first what we call light centers, small mini soccer fields with lights. The capacity now, or the output now from those same LED type panels that are put there is 8 times more. So the technology is changing, as the professor said, quite significantly in this period. And that is really the exciting part, that we're having savings now of about 80%, but the actual volume of light that we can produce in LED, etc., is increasing significantly and will really have an impact going forward.
So when it comes to the rollout of these light centers, you brought that up now, you've got pilot projects across South Africa, you've got pilot projects across Africa, you recently had a roadshow. Give us an idea of how exactly these pilot projects are working and how you expect to roll them out.
In simplicity, we've made a commitment to roll out more than 100 of these light centers across Africa. And specifically they are attached to local communities that are off-grid and where you can have an impact to people's lives. Because basically at night, the lights come on automatically, they can have a social life, they can have education, etc. But what we see more importantly is a proof point for the company in terms of how we can develop sustainable solar road and street type solutions. Solutions like replacing the existing traditional mast with a connection onto the grid, with sodium lamps, etc., and how we can replace it with solar and LED. So each of these are really effectively road and street solutions, and they are really have been incredibly successful. So where we've put down some of them on in the recent roadshow that we did, we had areas where there was no light at all. And you start up one of these systems, it comes on automatically, and admittedly within half an hour you have maybe up to 1,000 people who've suddenly descended from nowhere, where there's no light. And they're suddenly descended around you and they're playing a game of soccer. And that's how you can have impact in people's lives. Yeah. And that's really quite significant.
And you talk about, the fact that it's off-grid, and of course Eskom very much geared to the on-grid space. Yep. But it is so expensive to connect people to the grid, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa. So I suppose making sure that you have access to electricity that isn't reliant on players like Eskom is going to be key to energy provision in the continent.
Absolutely, and of course the further that you get into rural areas, the more expensive it becomes, because the density of consumers is that much lower. So it is an expensive exercise. And once again, I think there's definitely an area that will be taken up by exactly the solution that JJ said, that the technology is there, it's working. It's not Eskom's role as defined by our shareholder to get involved in these types of projects directly, but we are still very supportive of the technology, and we're making sure that we roll these projects, our grid projects, in conjunction with the type of projects that JJ has, so that even if there is a waiting period of perhaps 2 to 3 years for a community to get connected to the grid, for those 2 to 3 years to have the advantage of early access to light, computers, cell phone charging, etc., makes an enormous difference to that community. I fully agree with what JJ said. So we're definitely working hand in hand, ourselves from the grid and other suppliers on the off-grid solutions.
Itotia, when it comes to providing the finance for the rollout of this, is there enough finance coming to the market from organizations like yourself and of course from the private sector, and is it being rolled out quickly enough to meet the demands? I mean, there is the opportunity there, but is it being met quickly enough?
Perhaps not as quickly enough, but you now have an increasing number of financial institutions that have taken a keen interest in this market. I would say I think the first ones were really the private equity firms and the venture capitalists who saw an opportunity very early of what these emerging technologies could be able to do. I think the very nature of this form of financing is that it's patient, and I think it provides that kind of financing for, I would say, early technology. So I think that was that has really helped to sort of like initialize the process. I think what really needs to happen now is for the commercial banks and I would say the mainstream financial sector to now start providing the kind of financing for these projects. I think there's still quite some number of challenges that they're experiencing, especially if you look at mini grids. I think the key thing that a commercial bank is looking is that sort of like things to do with the feed-in tariffs, the kind of guarantees that those kind of tariffs that the project developers will be able to enjoy in time with the governments. But yes, on a whole, I think a very positive rollout of these facilities. For us, as IFC, we basically put on two caps. We invest directly in some of these project developers that are looking to set up these projects that are going to be able to provide energy to communities. So we invest directly in these companies.
I mean, how much have you invested when you talk about that, Itotia? I mean, how much money specifically have you put into, I suppose, the solar space when it comes to provision of these lanterns, or more broadly in the solar renewable energy space? Or perhaps, I suppose you could, take a step back and then look more broadly at the renewable energy space.
I think renewable energy, I think my comment, I think, would be on the renewable energy space, because solar in particular, I think perhaps you've not seen emerging projects that are specifically focusing on solar, I think, for mini grids. But I think in renewable energy, I think IFC last year, I think, committed more than $300 million on renewable energy projects in Africa. So I think that has been a sizable investment that IFC has made.
Professor, when it comes to the affordability factor, talk to us about how technological advancements are being able to bridge that gap, and then, how affordable is it right now?
I think this is a very interesting topic, because having the PV and the LED, both as semiconductor systems, everybody knows Moore's law, which says the price just keeps on dropping dramatically. I think if you think about PV, the sun is providing us with about 1,000 watts per square meter. So your PV efficiency is not that important, but it converts your sun energy into electrical energy. Then you have a storage device, which at the moment is usually a storage battery. And then you have the LED, which is getting cheaper by the day because of the same Moore's law, or called Heitz's law. But we believe that a lot of research can be done on the energy storage device, which can be even supercapacitors can be considered. If you have your solid state lighting device using only a small amount of energy, then your storage becomes much less critical. Once we have looked at the energy storage system, you may have people adding PV, store the energy and sell the stored energy in the local village, which means you're sort of
taking the sun's energy and making money out of it, basically.
and grow your own PV plant to bigger and bigger. But the challenge is the storage of energy. But
is that something you're doing research into?
We see it's very important, because, as the professor mentioned, the combination of the panel, the PV panel, the battery, and the LED are very important. in terms of what the light output is and the efficiency, how long it will last, etc. So it's very important. So that from that perspective of what is an optimal solution as opposed to an individual component, yes, we look at it from that perspective.
Yeah. When it comes to mini grids, of course, that's another aspect, because we talked about off grids. What are your views on the potential of this in perhaps even South Africa, but let's extend it really to the continent?
Sure. Firstly, just to come back to the issue of batteries, that is the Achilles heel of the system. Unfortunately, the sun is shining during the day, you're getting the extraction of electricity from these systems, but we use electricity at night time. So that really is the problem. In terms of mini grids, that does make a lot of sense for a village to actually aggregate the electricity needs and then to put up a system, a photovoltaic system for the village itself. And we're seeing instances of that come up. And for remote villages, that is the perfect solution. Reticulation of a village is also now with technology possible with prepayment meters actually run by the village itself. So it actually then becomes an income generator for people in the village to actually run the system, to reticulate the village and be able to once again disconnect a home in the village if they haven't paid for the electricity to the local vendor. So it's an amazing business model which I'm sure will catch up and will be very sensible for those villages which are at a great distance from a national grid.
Itotia, when we're talking about mini grids, of course, you brought up the topic. Talk to us about the scale that is needed and how finance institutions they can then play into this. Because, of course, when you've got, everyone in the village buying into the infrastructure, it perhaps means that you can have a loan for one entity as opposed to individuals who are looking to buy that solar infrastructure.
Right, I think the key consideration that financial institutions are really looking at, I think one is the kind of the policy and regulation environment surrounding the kind of ecosystem that these mini grids will be working with. So if that is favorable, and that I mean from the aspect that yes, you have a mini grid, but the key thing that the financial institution will want to see is the off-taker, who's really the utility company or the regulatory authority in terms of the tariffs that they have provided. So I think that's usually the key aspect that financial institutions look at. And I think once they're convinced on that, then the kind of secondary issues that they're looking at is the capacity of the project developer to be able to execute this, his experience, and the fact that he really has a sound business model towards it. So I think more of an easier case for isolated mini grids than the ones on grid, where you sort of like have challenges with the off-taker. But I think overall, I think it's been positive, although I think the project developers would have liked it to be unfolding at a much quicker pace than it's happening at the moment, because these deals do take a bit of time to close, on an average maybe about 1 or 2 years.
We're talking about the problem here where really it's the return and the time for return on investment, and that really seems to be a hindrance when it comes to perhaps putting money into it. Professor, talk to us about some of the challenges when it comes to rollout of mini grids and what type of potential you see for them.
I think one of the interesting aspects of this is because photovoltaics and solid-state lighting are low-voltage devices, low-voltage systems, which means the safety aspects and regulatory aspects disappear. So a mini village can do the whole electrical installation without any electrical safety issues or rules or regulations. And because the price keeps going down, means you can very easily extend your investment. And because the life expectancy of the PV panel and the solid-state lighting is just so long that there's no maintenance concerns actually involved in this. So, and I think also internationally there's a tendency towards getting disconnected from services, even in big cities. So it's no more a sort of a stigma attached to getting disconnected from a grid. And those aspects, it will become popular to say, look at my lighting installation, I've got this PV, I've got storage of energy, I've got my laptop, I've got my cell phone, which I can then charge during the day, and so on. So I think the cost of PV keeps on going down, and it is already fairly marginal to start competing with conventional power stations.
Well, there we go. I think on that note, let's, before we get into that discussion, let's open up the floor for question and answers. Is anyone here who's got a pressing question that they'd like to ask to our panel of judges?
Yeah, sure. I'd just like to pose one question through to the panel, and that from a regulatory point of view, obviously, both in South Africa and also going up into Africa, there's going to be quite an excitement to get into this once it starts rolling out. I'm just curious about the regulatory side of controlling what's going to end up with the consumer in order to make a success out of this project.
And of course, before we answer that, if you could just give us your name and of course title.
Yeah, my name is Trevor Milne. I'm from a company called Tridonic South Africa, and I'm the managing director for Tridonic.
Great. Anyone want to step in there?
I think once again, the Achilles heel is going to be the quality of the products rolled out. So to me, it's less to do with the electricity regulation. This isn't about that. This is about the standards and enforcement of standards. We're seeing, unfortunately, a number of inferior products being brought into our country. I'm certainly not referring to Philips, good systems, if I may say so. But they are, in competition to Philips and other reputable suppliers, standards which are not up to scratch, and particularly on battery systems. And this is where I differ slightly with the professor. I think whereas the panels and the lights certainly have got longevity, the battery systems is where that Achilles heel is. And if you don't have a good quality system with standards actually in place and enforced, then you do find that there will be exploitation of the poor. So I think that is where the standards are particularly relevant. Would be
is this cheap imports, another sector that is being hit by cheap imports?
Well, I think it's the quality of the imports, because obviously the pricing, as mentioned, is dropping significantly. But what is the concern is the person in the base of the pyramid has to make the right decision. So when they go into purchase, or they purchase from their local person, a lantern, the quality of that lantern is important because it's a sizable part of their income. They have to be sure of that. And it's terrible if something's not working, or if they've bought a import that doesn't have the quality level, that they don't actually meet the expectation. In some ways, it's exactly the same as a on-grid person in South Africa who goes into the local hardware store and buys a low-quality light. And he doesn't get the light he expects. He gets disappointed. And therefore, they turn away from technology.
So what can be done to be guarded against this? And how do you recognize low-quality products apart from perhaps a cheaper price, which could be a signal?
That's obviously quite difficult, and often is driven by what the consumer believes. So you see specifically with lanterns, and I'm sure my colleague in Kenya will make the same comment, is that there are various types of lanterns, and the consumer gets to know. And they will move to the more branded type of products. In the same way, people move to more branded type of buying lamps, LEDs from the hardware store, and they look at the typical known brands where they can actually have a certain level of quality.
But Itotia, let's bring you into this, because of course it is about affordability, especially for income groups that are at the low end of the scale. They don't have a lot of money. They have to worry about putting bread on the table for their children. When it comes to pricing of electricity, and when it comes to pricing of these energy products, most likely they are going to go for the cheapest product. So how do you address this issue of quality?
Right. I think it's all about consumer education and awareness, because more often than not, I think from what we have seen is that consumers, by and large, know that some of these, the cheapest things are perhaps not the best quality. I think where problems arise is where a consumer thinks that he's buying into a good quality product and it's not. And I think the harm is not more than transcends just beyond the fact that really he did not have the disposable income to spend on it. And then they start really undermining the technology, and it's no longer an issue of this product doesn't work, it's the issue of solar does not work.
But of course,
and I think that's the biggest challenge that we have.
When it is a case of survival, and when you do only have a certain amount of monthly income, you are going to possibly make that choice. So what role can perhaps government play, or what role can other parties play to make sure that the best products are being used by the large proportion of people that are looking to this technology?
Right, I think you're right. I mean, you can't get away from the fact that somebody does not have $30, so they only have $15. But I think it's all about awareness and creating an informed decision. So even if he's settling for a low quality product, then he does understand the implications of it. Yep. But more importantly, as you have said, what we have seen is that very weak structures in regards to compliance. These borders tend to be very porous, and all these products which do not really meet the country specification in terms of their Bureau of Standards filtering into the market. So the compliance element of it has unfortunately been quite weak, and these products find themselves in the market, which leaves just the only option in terms of just a very enhanced consumer awareness campaign, where you're really trying to address and to educate the consumers on what is a good quality product and what is not, so that perhaps even if he's making that decision based on the fact that this is exactly what he can afford, then at the back of his mind he does realize that perhaps he's taking a risk in buying the product that he has, and it does not live up to his expectations. Then he knows there's another one. But really, I think it's an issue of compliance, tightening the rules, and at the same time just enhancing the consumer education awareness bit. And I believe the third element is where organizations like Philips and other more reputable organizations will start spending a bit more in terms of now creating brands that consumers can be able to relate with.
Well, there we go. We've got Itotia's views on that. Let's open up the floor to another question. Any other questions there?
Facebook recently celebrated having 1 billion people on there. In contrast with this, you have a number of people without light in Africa. Do we have a rollout strategy or a date by when we want to have all the people in Africa with lights?
Well, there we go. Who would like to answer that question?
I think
do we, when you're talking about we, actually, perhaps we should clarify that.
Anyone on the panel? Questions open to you.
I think one can dream about this. And what I see is a DIY PV LED kit, which simply says in regards to quality as well, it is partly self-regulatory because you get cost-effective energy efficiency. So the person buys his panel, his battery or capacitor or whatever the storage device may be, plus his solid-state lighting. He connects it up because it's all low voltage, and he will pretty soon pick up whether the light, the battery or the supply, whatever, lasts for 1 night, 2 nights or 3 nights relative to what he paid for it. And I think this thing will grow very rapidly, that my neighbor has got a system that works, DIY, put it up, he's got his cell phone and everything is working, and he's got good lighting, he can study, etc. So I think to guess numbers, and I think Andrew mentioned that, you can't, this is a very complicated thing, but it can pick up at the same speed as cell phones and tablets and things like that. In the non-grid
And that's
systems.
Of course, you know, there's this discussion around renewable energies, around solar, what it could do to leapfrog the issues of energy needs in Africa, and exactly what mobile technology did for the financial sector and access to finance.
Yeah, on a similar view as well, from the company's perspective, we've got to be careful not to assume that the base of the pyramid is all one group of people and they're all uniform. There are people who are earning less than $1 a day, and in logic, it'll take them much longer to be able to afford those type of solutions, and donations from NGOs, etc., will be important. You have then a group of that above $5 a day, you can go to standard retail, and it's the group in the middle, that big bulk group in the middle of 250, 300 million people in Africa. And I believe if we start approaching, as discussed, the right financial models to allow them to actually purchase, there can be a very quick uptake. And it's not just about lighting as well, it's about clean cooking, because they're using kerosene for cooking as well. It's about clean water. And I think once we make this breakthrough in terms of energy and how we actually, the model, how people can afford it, you'll see this ripple-on effect where you can affect a number of areas in the base of the pyramid that really impact people's lives.
Mm-hmm. That domino effect, yeah. One more question from the floor.
Yes, my name is Erik Heutink. You've talked about LED lighting off-grid, solar. What are the possibilities of LED lighting on-grid? Can you say something more about that?
Well, I think I'll throw that to the man from Eskom.
Okay. Good. Well, LED technology is astonishing. It has come on in leaps and bounds over the last couple of years, and there's no doubt that is the technology of the future. From Eskom's side, the opportunity is in the energy savings that accompany the technology. So we're investing a large amount of money in rollout of technologies, specifically LED technologies, to home and business, and we'll continue doing that. So we've visited this year about 700,000 homes in South Africa and done LED swap outs, and we'll continue that probably to about 10 million homes in the country. And we'll be fitting about 10,000 buildings in the country with LED technology by the end of this year as well, just for this year. So it is certainly a technology which has worked extremely well for us, and the energy savings and the longevity of the technology is, and the cost reduction as it's coming down, definitely the way of the future, and we're 100% behind it.
Does that answer your question?
Are there also possibilities outside the homes and the offices, what you said, the buildings? Maybe Mr. Van Dongen from Philips can answer.
Yeah, I confirm exactly the same in terms of Eskom also has rollouts and rebate structures in terms of supporting businesses actually doing the conversion. I know in our own company itself, in terms of changes to our warehouse, where we changed the lighting in the warehouse, we could make 30–40% saving, and that is really quite significant in terms of that. So I do concur that there is tremendous opportunities, not just in traditional homes, but in the in shopping malls, wherever, in terms of that. So it definitely is an opportunity in those areas.
Yeah. I think if you look at lighting fairs around the world, international fairs, 3 years ago or 5 years ago, LED was a niche little technology in the corner. Now these are LED shows. They completely dominate. So security lighting, underground mining lighting, all these niche areas, even chandelier lighting is now going LED. Yeah. So absolutely every application, studio lighting in future, studio lighting in future will be LED. There's just no limit to the extent to which it's been rolled out. It's very exciting.
I think on that positive note, when you talk about the future and the opportunities, let's end it at that. Thanks, of course, for coming through. And Professor, you talk about Moore's Law. So we hope to get you back in 5 years' time and see where this industry is, of course, in Africa. Huge opportunities. That's it for this edition of Philips African Dialogues. Thanks so much for joining us. Until next time, from myself, Samantha, and of course my guests, have a great evening.